I'm Dr. Amol Gupta, and I want to thank you for joining me on another episode of Medicine Mentors, where we interview masters in medicine, leading physicians at the top universities across the United States to learn from their experiences and derive key insights, traits, and best practices that can guide medical students and residents. Today we're speaking with Dr. Robert Bacallao. Dr. Bacallao is a professor of medicine and an adjunct professor of anatomy, cell biology, and physiology at the Indiana University. He completed his training from the University of Illinois and a fellowship in nephrology from UCLA. Dr. Bacallao is widely regarded for his research on polycystic kidney disease and has published extensively on its pathogenesis. He's the founder of Apoptocys, a company which aims to bring novel therapeutic interventions to people with autosomal dominant polycystic kidney disease. He's involved in medical student, resident, and fellow training as a member of the faculty at Indiana University. Thank you so much, Dr. Bacallao, for giving us this opportunity to learn more about your life story and experiences.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gupta. Often when I hear these introductions, I often wonder who came in the room.
That's very kind of you, Dr. Bacallao. I want to start by hearing a little bit about your childhood and your journey from childhood to current. If you can talk about some of the major people who've had an influence in your life.
My father was an electrical engineer, and not quite understanding the American system of education, he had no understanding of the value of a liberal arts education. When you attended university in Cuba, you were going to be one of three things. You're either going to be a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. There was no other options. So at the ripe age of 18, I sat down with him and I said, I'm going to study engineering, but the goal will be to be a doctor. That was the agreement. The mentor I had in med school was Dr. Clifford Piltz, who was the chair of medicine at the West Side VA. His knowledge of medicine was encyclopedic. There's no other way to put it. The interesting thing about Cliff was, despite all the weaknesses in the VA system that occurred in the 1970s and 1980s, you were never permitted as a resident to claim any of those weaknesses as an excuse for not delivering superb care to your patients. That would get you on the wrong side of Dr. Piltz immediately. The next part of my life features a bit of the random walk that occurs. I was looking for a nephrology fellowship. As it happened, my sister was working as the secretary for Dr. Charles Kleeman out at the Cheer Center at UCLA. And Dr. Kleeman was boarded in endocrine, nutrition, and nephrology. But he felt himself to be a nephrologist first and foremost. So on the strength of my sister's capabilities as a secretary, I came into an interview where everyone was already pre-prepared to accept me based on that singular fact. I look back at it and I just think of all the things. And there at UCLA, I had a wide variety of mentors. I mean, it was a superb training program. First and foremost was Leon Fine. And Leon was looking forward to the future of medicine. So when I sat down in Leon's office and said, I think I'd like to do medical research, but I have no idea if I'm good at it. And he said, well, I'm telling you right now, you can't work in my lab, nor will I permit you to work in any of the divisional researchers' labs. I'm going to go through the campus at UCLA, and we're going to come up with a training program that is going to prepare you for the next generation of medical researchers. I sit back and I think of all the marvelous luck to have that conversation. So in short order, he identified Dr. Bill Wickner, who was studying bacterial protein export. I met with Bill, and then came the next cosmic accident. At the time, a well-renowned researcher came to Bill's lab to do a sabbatical year. His name was Gunther Krau, and Gunther was the head of the Biomedical Institute in Salzburg, Austria, a marvelously talented individual who had a deep and abiding love of playing the violin and also playing chess. And as Gunther and I struck up a friendship over playing chess, one day I was driving him to a research seminar in Bear Mountain area, and as we were chatting, he says, you really should come to Europe to complete your training. And I turned to him and I said, well, I've been thinking about it. I've been looking into the area of epithelial cell polarity. And when I read the literature, I find that the work of a gentleman by the name of K. Siemens seems to be of interest to me. And Gunther paused for about 15 seconds, says, do you mean Kai? And I said, well, I guess that may be how you pronounce the name. He says, oh, yes, I know Kai. I said, oh, could you give me a recommendation to enter his lab? He says, well, I actually sit on the board of the European Molecular Biology Laboratory. I had no clue who I was talking to. He said, yes, I can provide you a letter. So in the strength of an interest in chess and a friendship with this individual, he wrote me a lovely letter. I met with Kai. There, off I went to EMBL.
What a journey.
Yes.
There's a few things that really stick out as I listen to your journey. I feel like a lot of us get a lot of help and a lot of support in the major successes that we have. But it seems as if the way you talked about it, your sister got you into UCLA, one of the research guys got you into Europe. Is this really an outlook to life? How can we all start to adopt and appreciate this helping hand or these cosmic forces that help us in these decisions that many times we just attribute to our own hard work or in our own abilities to convince people?
So I think the hard work allows you to be prepared for when the door opens. I think to some extent, if I didn't have the background and training I had when I went for my interviews at UCLA, they would have saw through that in 10 seconds. So you had to come, as a tennis term, you had to come to the net with your racket. Okay? So that's what the hard work does for you. It does make it so that when the doors open, you are a fit for going through that path. That's number one. But in terms of accepting the randomness of it, you have to be open to it. One of the great advantages in my life has been my wife. And, when I walked through the door in California and said, what would you think if I said we could go to Europe for a couple of years? Now, we had 2 children and one on the way, number 3. There were many women that would have said, absolutely not. And my wife said, why don't we go? It'll be a lovely adventure. So it requires more than just yourself to accept that path.
So you've had a lot of mentors in your life. You've really experienced mentorship at a very deep level. So as a mentee, what do you always remember when you're working with your mentors? And then on the flip side, as a mentor, what do you always remember when you work with mentees?
There's going to be gaps in your knowledge. You're going to have to keep working that problem throughout your entire career. But you need to recognize when you're out of your depth and to ask for help. And that's the great thing. I've never had anyone denigrate me for asking for help, ever. And so I just never do it to anyone else.
Mentorship seems to have changed a lot, and you've probably noticed this. I've just heard about it, but you've noticed it throughout your life, how in the past, relationships that mentees and mentors had seem to be at a much different level of trust than the relationships that we see today. Can you describe this change and why you think we've moved in this direction? And is there anything we can do to come back to where this relationship was before?
The problem is that once things have occurred to lose trust, to me, I always have this ratio of 10 to 1. It takes tenfold more effort to rebuild trust that's been lost than it is to maintain it. I think several things have summated to eliminate trust in our system. One, medicine has become, for good or ill, a corporate enterprise. And at the end of the day, if it's a corporate enterprise, it's about making money. Period. And I can't tell you how many conversations where I've talked to well-meaning experts in delivery of healthcare and how they keep talking about if we just apply some good business practices, healthcare will be that much more efficient. And I keep pointing out to them that healthcare is not in and of itself a business. You do have to make some money to keep things going because that's the economic system we find ourselves in. But in point of fact, the minute you've made it into a profit-making enterprise, you have skewed the relationship between you and your patients.
So, looking at all the current challenges that we have, some people are able to, even today, develop very strong, very stable relationships with their mentors, but others seem to have a challenge. What would your advice be to those who have a challenge in developing these meaningful relationships? Are there any tools that they can use to build stronger relationships?
So, this is one of the interesting things I find about medical education that is a bit problematic. And I mentioned I didn't get a liberal arts education. As time has gone on, I actually think that is probably the most important thing to have under your belt, to have worked through the problem of the human existence. And if you look at our medical training, we take highly talented people who have, in essence, delayed adolescence for as long as possible. In college, they weren't being all that social. They were in the libraries. Their social interactions were contracted due to that. And then you go to med school. And med school is a lot of work, and there's not a lot of free time. That's not really expanding your horizons. So that's my advice to them is get out of your shell. Spend some time, read a novel from a top 10 list of novels from the year. Novels that start telling you about the human existence and some of the problems that any good English literature major would have spent times discussing in a book club or in class or writing essays about. Because those human experiences are what will end up making you a better doctor.
So, out of all the things that you shared with us today, if I were to ask you one thing that you wish you knew when you started medical school or residency, what would that be?
Stay humble. Stay humble. There are some patients that I look back on in which the communication was blocked because I was arrogant, and that was my fault. And reflecting upon that, we're all going to have our failures as physicians, and you need to recognize that right at the get-go. There are going to be cases where you're going to sit back and they are going to haunt you for the rest of your life. Got to move on, stay humble.
Dr. Bacallao, this was very insightful. I want to try to encapsulate the many pearls of wisdom that you've given into a few critical insights that I've taken from your life story. I'd say the first one is the power of the helping hand and how our careers are formed as a result of the blessings of so many people in our life, as we've seen from your life. But it's really being able to recognize that will bring us that one thing that you told us about, staying humble. And when I heard your journey, that was the word that continued to resonate in my mind, humility. Second, I'd say when I asked you, well, then what's the role of our hard work, right? And you said, well, hard work allows you to be prepared when the door opens. You have to be standing at the net with a racket. So being prepared when that opportunity comes, that's our job. And recognizing the blessings of others who have had contributions in our life is just as important. And I'd say finally, the third thing is this concept of getting out of our shell, that we need to look outside of medicine so we can broaden our thinking, which is going to be extremely instrumental in understanding the lives of our patients, helping our patients outside of just that 30-minute clinical encounter. So I'm very grateful to you, sir, for all these wisdom pearls that you've shared with us.
Well, thank you. And I thought that was a marvelous summation of what I was trying to get across. So thank you for that.
To our audience, thank you for tuning in with us here on the Medicine Mentors. Thank you for joining us as we learn from the masters of medicine.